The desperate war. The emerging empire. The galaxy had seen many wars, but none like this. The Tselvan Empire, a ruthless alien civilization, had spent centuries conquering one planet after another. They believed in domination, in crushing weaker species under their rule. Their fleet was massive, their technology advanced, and their army unstoppable. No species had ever survived a full-scale war against them. And now, their sights were set on Earth. Humanity had fought bravely. They had resisted longer than any other species before them. But one by one, their colonies fell. Their space stations burned. Their warships, no matter how advanced, were torn apart by Tselvan firepower. The United Earth Defense Fleet was losing ships faster than they could replace them. Hope was fading. Admiral Julian Kane stood in the war room, staring at the holographic map of the Sol system. Red markers represented the Tselvan fleet, hundreds of ships, closing in on Earth's final line of defense. Only a handful of blue markers remained, human ships, outnumbered and outgunned. The Tselvans will break through in 2 days, maybe less, said General Rebecca Holt, her voice grim. We have no reinforcements left. A heavy silence filled the room. President Eleanor Graves, the leader of the United Earth Council, clenched her fists. Surrender is not an option, she said. If they take Earth, humanity is finished. They won't just take Earth. Admiral Kane added. They'll destroy it. The Tselvans see us as a threat. They won't let us survive. Everyone in the room knew he was right. The Tselvans didn't just conquer, they erased. Every species that resisted them was wiped out completely. The Tselvans believed only the strong deserved to exist, and humans had proven to be strong, too strong. And so, the Tselvans had decided to end humanity once and for all. The last hope. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a secret underground facility, a group of scientists worked in desperation. They were Earth's last hope, the only ones with a plan that could change the course of the war. Dr. Elias Carter, a brilliant scientist, stood before a team of engineers and researchers. He looked exhausted, but his eyes burned with determination. We don't have time for doubts, he said. This project must be completed before the enemy reaches Earth. The scientists had been working on something unlike any weapon ever built before. Not a bomb, not a ship, not a fleet, but something far more dangerous, something that only humans could create. It's almost ready, said Dr. Sarah Lynn, his second in command. But we've never tested it before. If it fails. Dr. Carter shook his head. Failure is not an option. This is the only chance we have. They all knew what was at stake. The Tselvans thought they had already won. They believed humans had no more weapons left to fight with. They were wrong. The Tselvan invasion begins. In the cold darkness of space, the Tselvan fleet approached Earth. The massive warships moved like an unstoppable tide, their dark hulls gleaming under distant stars. At the center of the fleet was the Warbringer, the Tselvan command ship. From inside, Supreme Commander Vorik watched as Earth's final defenses came into view. This is the end of the humans, Vorik said, his voice filled with amusement. They were stronger than we expected, but they are still just primitives. Their time is over. His second in command, Captain Serac, nodded. Our scans show only a few remaining warships protecting the planet. They will fall within hours. Vorik smiled. Good. Begin the assault. The order was given, and the Tselvan warships advanced. Gigantic cannons powered up, charging with deadly energy. The first wave of bombardments struck the human fleet. Earth's last remaining ships fought back, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Explosions filled the battlefield. One by one, human ships were destroyed. The Tselvans moved closer, preparing for the final attack on Earth. Everything was going according to plan. Or so they thought. The secret awakens. Back on Earth, deep underground, Dr. Carter and his team activated the final sequence of their mysterious project. The room was filled with tension. This was the moment they had been preparing for. A low hum filled the chamber. Energy crackled through the air. The lights flickered. And then something changed. Far above, in orbit, Selvan ships began to experience something strange. Systems flickered. Sensors glitched. Pilots felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into their minds. Doubt. Supreme Commander Vorik frowned. Report. What is happening? His officers scrambled for answers, but there were none. Something was interfering with their fleet. Weapons refused to fire. Navigation systems malfunctioned. Even the most disciplined soldiers felt fear for the first time in their lives. Vorik's confidence wavered. This was not possible. The humans had no more weapons. They had no more ships. And yet, something was happening. Something they did not understand. Dr. Carter watched the data coming in. His hands trembled as he whispered, "It's working." The real battle was only beginning. The mysterious weapon. The underground facility was silent except for the hum of machines and the faint peeping of monitors. The team of scientists stood frozen, watching as their creation, humanity's last hope, was finally activated. Dr. Elias Carter's fingers trembled as he adjusted the controls. "Status report," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Sarah Lynn, his second in command, checked the readings. Her eyes widened. "It's spreading faster than we thought." "What do you mean?" Carter asked. "It's already reaching the enemy fleet." Carter stared at the data. It was true. Their weapon, if it could even be called that, was already working. And that Selvans had no idea what was happening. Confusion among the Selvans. On the Warbringer, Supreme Commander Vorik slammed his fist against the control panel. "What is happening to our ships?" His officers scrambled to answer, but no one had an explanation. "Our targeting systems are malfunctioning," one officer said. "We are losing power in several warships." "Impossible," Vorik growled. "How?" "There are no enemy ships left." Captain Sirak hesitated. "Sir, it's not just the ships. The crew is acting strangely." Vorik turned sharply. "Explain." Sirak swallowed hard. He didn't know how to describe it. His own hands were shaking. His mind felt foggy, unfocused. He had been a soldier for decades, but now he was afraid. Selvans were not supposed to feel fear. Their minds were disciplined, trained from birth. But now, fear was spreading like an infection. The weapon that wasn't a weapon. Back in the underground lab, Carter exhaled slowly. "We did it," he whispered. This was not a laser cannon, not a super bomb, not an artificial intelligence attack. This was something entirely new, a technology that didn't destroy ships or cities. It disrupted minds. For years, the Selvans had believed they were superior because they were stronger, faster, and more advanced. Their entire empire was built on the idea that they were fearless conquerors. But the humans had discovered their weakness. They hacked fear itself. The device they had built used neural wave interference, something no species had ever weaponized before. It was designed to target the Selvan brain structure, amplifying the one thing they had trained themselves to suppress: doubt. And once doubt entered their minds, it spread like wildfire. The first Selvan defeat. "Sir, we are losing control of the fleet," an officer shouted on the Warbringer. Vorik's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. This cannot be real. He looked at his crew. They were hesitating. They were questioning orders. This was the first time in Selvan history that soldiers hesitated in battle. And in war, hesitation was death. The human fleet, what remained of it, began to counterattack. They shouldn't have been able to win. Their ships were damaged, their weapons weak, their numbers too low. But the Selvans were not fighting like Selvans anymore. For the first time, they were afraid. For the first time, they were losing. A desperate retreat. We must retreat," Captain Sirak stammered. Vorik turned to him in rage. "Retreat? The Selvan Empire does not retreat." But then he looked at the battlefield. Their warships, once unstoppable, were now fleeing. Crews were abandoning posts. Officers were disobeying orders. And Vorik felt it too. A cold grip of fear wrapped around his heart. This is not possible, he whispered. But it was. Humanity had found the one thing that could break them. Not weapons, not numbers, but fear. The great Selvan fleet, the same fleet that had destroyed countless civilizations, turned and ran. For the first time in history, the Selvan Empire lost a battle. The awakening of humanity. Back on Earth, in the underground facility, Carter and his team watched in awe. "It's over," Dr. Lin breathed. Carter shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." The humans had survived. Against all odds, they had turned back an empire. But now, the entire galaxy would know. And humanity was no longer just another species fighting to survive. Now, they were something far more dangerous. Now, they were a threat. The final stand begins. The war was far from over. The Selvan Empire had suffered a humiliating defeat, their once unstoppable fleet forced into retreat, their fearless soldiers crippled by doubt. But Supreme Commander Vorik was not finished. On the bridge of the Warbringer, he stood seething with rage, his claws digging into the metal console. The retreat had been necessary, for now, but this was not the end. "This disgrace will not stand," he growled. "We will return, and we will burn their world to ashes." The Selvans were not just conquerors, they were an empire of vengeance. And now, they hated humanity more than any species before. The next attack would be swift, brutal, final. Earth prepares for the inevitable. Back on Earth, the victory was bittersweet. Humanity had survived for now, but everyone knew the truth. The Selvans would come back. And next time, they would not underestimate humanity. Inside the underground command center, President Eleanor Graves stood before a group of scientists, generals, and strategists. The room was tense, the air heavy with uncertainty. "We have bought ourselves time," she said, "but not much. The Selvans will return, and they will come with their full might." Admiral Julian Kane stepped forward. "Then we strike first," he said firmly. "We take the fight to them." The room went silent. A direct assault on the Selvan Empire. It was madness. Humanity was still recovering, still rebuilding from the last battle. Dr. Elias Carter, the scientist behind the mysterious, fear-inducing weapon, shook his head. "We're not ready," he said. "We barely survived the last battle. If we attack now, we'll be wiped out. But if we wait," Kane countered, "they'll return with a force we can't stop." Both men were right. The question wasn't if the Selvans would return. It was when. The Selvans make their move. The answer came sooner than expected. Alarms blared across Earth's defense network. Sensors picked up multiple warp signatures. Selvan ships were already on their way. "They're moving faster than we thought," an officer shouted. "They'll be here in less than 48 hours." Panic rippled through the command center. The fleet was still repairing, the planetary defenses still weakened. There was no time to prepare a proper defense. "They're coming to end us," President Graves whispered. Dr. Carter clenched his fists. "No, not yet. The superweapon evolves." Deep in the research lab, Carter and his team worked frantically. Their first weaponized fear pulse had been a prototype, a desperate last attempt to stop the Selvans. But now, they had data. Now they could refine it. Dr. Sarah Lynn typed furiously on her console. "We were only using the fear amplification at 10% of its potential," she said. "If we push it further, we could turn their fear into paralysis." Carter finished. The Selvans were already vulnerable. If they could enhance the effect, make the fear even stronger, then the enemy wouldn't just hesitate. They would break. But there was a risk. The weapon worked by targeting the Selvan brain, creating instability in their thought patterns. If pushed too far, the effects could become permanent, turning the Selvans into mindless, fear-stricken beings. Are we really willing to do this? Dr. Lin asked quietly. We could destroy their entire species without ever firing a shot. Carter didn't answer, because deep down he knew humanity had never been the monsters of the galaxy, but that Selvins had forced them into a corner. And when humans were backed into a corner, they always fought back. The battle begins. 48 hours later, the Selvin fleet arrived in the Sol system. It was twice the size of the last invasion force. Hundreds of warships, moving in perfect coordination. They weren't going to make the same mistakes again. This is it, Admiral Kane said. He stood on the bridge of the UES Resolute, Earth's last remaining Dreadnought-class warship. All ships prepare for battle. In orbit, Earth's defenses powered up. Every remaining warship, every planetary cannon, every space station was armed and ready. But the humans weren't relying on guns this time. This time, they had something else. In the underground lab, Dr. Carter and his team activated the enhanced fear pulse. The effect was instant. That Selvin's worst nightmare. On the Warbringer, Supreme Commander Vorik suddenly froze. Something was wrong. That Selvin soldiers on his bridge tensed, their claws twitching, their eyes darting around nervously. The fear was back. No, this time, it was stronger. Vorik felt his breath quicken, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced with uncertainty. What is happening? Captain Xirak gasped. He gripped the command panel, his body trembling. I can't think. All across the fleet, the Selvins were breaking down. Pilots abandoned their posts. Officers gave contradictory orders. Warships veered off course, colliding into one another. Fear had consumed them. For the first time in Selvin history, their perfectly disciplined soldiers were panicking like animals. The turning point. On the UES Resolute, Admiral Kane watched the chaos unfold. It's working, he breathed. Sir, enemy ships are retreating again, an officer reported. They're trying to escape. Kane narrowed his eyes. Not this time. The human fleet charged forward, firing relentlessly. No mercy. One by one, Selvin warships exploded, their crews unable to fight back. The once mighty invasion force collapsed, breaking apart under its own fear. And for the first time, that Selvin Empire was truly defeated. The aftermath. Hours later, the battlefield was silent. Earth had won. The Selvins had been shattered, their forces in full retreat. Dr. Carter sat in his lab, staring at the screen. Victory. But at what cost? They had created a weapon that didn't just defeat their enemies, it broke them. And deep down, he wondered, had humanity just become something even the Selvins would fear? The impossible power. The war was supposed to be over. The Selvin fleet had been shattered. Their once mighty warships were reduced to wreckage, their disciplined soldiers crippled by fear. For the first time in history, humanity had turned back the greatest empire in the galaxy, not with firepower, but with a weapon unlike anything seen before. But deep in the underground lab, Dr. Elias Carter wasn't celebrating. He stared at the monitor, watching the aftermath of the battle. His fingers trembled as he analyzed the data. The fear pulse had worked. It had done more than just work. It had completely broken the Selvin forces. But something was wrong. The Selvin collapse. Across the galaxy, reports were flooding in. The Selvin Empire was falling apart. Their fleets were in disarray. Their soldiers refused to fight. Their planets were descending into chaos. They're not just retreating, Dr. Sarah Lynn said in a hushed voice. They're collapsing. Carter's throat tightened. Explain. Lynn pulled up the latest intelligence feeds. Selvin commanders are refusing to give orders. Their armies are deserting. Entire colonies have gone silent. Their society is breaking down. For thousands of years, the Selvins had ruled with absolute discipline. Their warriors were bred to be fearless. Their empire was built on the idea that they were unstoppable. But now, They had felt true fear for the first time, and they couldn't handle it. The cost of victory. Admiral Julian Kane stood in Earth's war room, listening to the reports. "You're saying we didn't just defeat the Xelvans. We destroy them." Dr. Carter hesitated. "It's worse than that," he admitted. "Their minds aren't recovering. The fear is spreading, infecting their entire species. Their civilization isn't just weakened, it's dying." A heavy silence filled the room. President Eleanor Graves folded her arms. "So what are we saying here?" she asked slowly. "That we didn't just win the war, we broke an entire species." Carter swallowed hard. Yes. The truth settled over them like a weight. Humanity had created a weapon that didn't kill, didn't destroy buildings or burn cities. Instead, it had unraveled the Xelvans from the inside out. And the worst part, there was no way to stop it. A galaxy in fear. The news spread fast. Across the galaxy, alien empires watched in shock and terror. The Xelvans, the most powerful empire in known history, had been defeated without a single major invasion on their homeworld. Everyone asked the same question. If humanity could do this to the Xelvans, what could they do to the rest of us? Some species feared being next. Others wanted to ally with humanity, not out of friendship, but out of self-preservation. And in the darkest corners of the universe, whispers began to spread. The humans are dangerous. The humans don't need weapons. The humans fight with their minds. And perhaps the most terrifying whisper of all, the humans have become the monsters. The last Xelvan plea. A week after the battle, a transmission came through. It was heavily distorted, weak, barely functional. "This is Supreme Commander Vorik of the Xelvan Empire." The voice was not the powerful, commanding tone of a conqueror. It was weak, broken, afraid. We surrender," Vorik whispered. Those words had never been spoken by a Xelvan in all of history. "We surrender," he repeated, voice shaking. "Just, please, stop this." Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. The fear pulse had worked too well. The Xelvans weren't just surrendering. They were begging for mercy. But the real question was, did humanity still have mercy left? The decision that would change everything. Back in Earth's war room, the leaders debated. Admiral Kane wanted to press the advantage, force the Xelvans into permanent submission. "We've won," he said. "Why should we stop now? They would have wiped us out if the situation was reversed." Dr. Carter disagreed. "This isn't just war anymore," he said. "We're on the edge of committing genocide, not with weapons, but with fear. If we push any further, we might wipe them out entirely." President Graves stood silent, deep in thought. She had the final decision. Did humanity accept their surrender and stop? Or did they finish what they started and erase the Xelvans from existence? The choice of humanity. In the end, the decision was made. A final transmission was sent to the Xelvans. "This is President Eleanor Graves of the United Earth Council," she said. "Your surrender is accepted." The war was over. The Xelvans were defeated. But the cost was unknown. Because in the shadows of the galaxy, new threats were rising. Other empires, fearful of what humanity had done, were preparing for war. They weren't just afraid of humans anymore. They were preparing to destroy them before humanity became too powerful to stop. And so, even in victory, one truth remained. The war was not over. It was only changing. The enemy's desperation. The Xelvan Empire had fallen, but the galaxy had not found peace. The fear pulse had crippled the once mighty conquerors, leaving their fleets scattered, their commanders broken, their soldiers too terrified to fight. But not all Xelvans had given up. In the ruins of their empire, in the deepest corners of space, a new kind of Xelvan was rising. One not driven by conquest, but by something far more dangerous. Desperation. A shadow in the dark. On the Xelvan colony world of Dranaxis, deep beneath the ruined capital, a secret council gathered. 12 figures, cloaked in darkness, sat around a dimly lit chamber. They were Selvan survivors, those who had escaped the fear pulse's worst effects. And at the center of them all stood Lord Varish, the last surviving High Warlord of the Selvan Empire. His sharp eyes burned with a hatred that had never faded. "The humans think they have won," Varish growled, his voice echoing in the chamber. "They believe we are weak, broken." He turned to the gathered commanders. "But we are not broken. We are evolving." The others listened in silence. The old empire was dead. The old ways of brute conquest had failed. But now, they had learned a new way to fight. The birth of the Shadow War. Varish slammed a clawed fist onto the table. "The humans do not rely on strength alone. They fight with their minds. They strike where we do not expect. They turn our own fears against us." His voice darkened. "Then we must do the same." The gathered warlords tensed. For thousands of years, the Selvans had fought with overwhelming force, mighty warships, massive armies, brutal invasions, but those methods had failed. Now, they would fight like the humans, from the shadows, through deception, with fear. Varish leaned forward. "We will not fight them in open war. We will strike where they do not see us coming." "The humans have made a fatal mistake," another warlord hissed. "They let us live." Varish nodded. "And that is how we will destroy them." Humanity's unseen enemy. On Earth, humanity celebrated its victory. But Dr. Elias Carter had a feeling of unease. Sitting alone in his lab, he analyzed reports from deep space scanners. Something was wrong. The Selvans should have been collapsing completely, yet some fleets had gone silent, disappeared instead of surrendering. It was as if they had vanished into the void. Dr. Sarah Lynn entered, setting down a datapad. "More reports coming in," she said. "Selvan colonies are being abandoned. Entire populations disappearing." Carter frowned. "They're not disappearing," he said slowly. "They're hiding." The first attack, the first strike came without warning. A human cargo ship, the UES Pioneer, was traveling through an uncharted sector when it suddenly vanished. There was no distress call, no sign of attack. One moment, it was on the radar. The next, it was gone. A week later, a distant space station fell completely silent. Security footage showed nothing. No ships, no invaders, just an eerie emptiness where hundreds of people had once lived. At first, humanity thought it was a malfunction, a coincidence. Then, the messages started coming in. Distorted transmissions, scrambled voices. "They're here. They see everything. We are not alone." And then, silence. Fear strikes back. Admiral Julian Kane stormed into the war room. "We have a problem," he growled. President Eleanor Graves looked up. "How bad?" Kane threw a datapad onto the table. 12 missing ships in the past month. 3 space stations gone. No wreckage. No survivors. No enemy ships detected. Dr. Carter stepped forward. "It's the Selvans," he said firmly. "They're still out there." Kane narrowed his eyes. "But they're afraid of us. They should be hiding, not attacking." Carter shook his head. "They were afraid. But fear doesn't just make people run. It makes them desperate." Graves exhaled slowly. "So what are they doing?" Carter's voice was quiet. "They're fighting us the way we fought them. They're making us afraid. The hunters become the hunted." Across human space, mysterious disappearances increased. Colonists went missing. Ships vanished into the void. Military bases were silently wiped out. No explosions, no gunfire, just empty corridors and missing soldiers. Humanity had never fought an enemy like this before. The Selvans had transformed. They no longer fought with brute force. Now, they were the ghosts in the dark. Now, they were the monsters hiding in the shadows. And for the first time since the war began, humanity was starting to feel fear. The war enters a new phase. Back in Earth's underground facility, Dr. Carter stood at his console, watching as one final transmission played on repeat. It was from a human reconnaissance team. The last words they ever sent before vanishing. Through the static, a whispering voice came through. "You taught us fear. Now let us teach it to you." Carter's blood ran cold. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The aftermath. The war had changed. Once, the Selvan Empire had been an unstoppable force, crushing planets under its rule. Then, humanity had shattered them, turning their own fear against them. But now, the Selvans had adapted. They no longer fought in grand battles. They no longer sent massive fleets. Instead, they became shadows. They struck without warning. And no one was safe. A galaxy in terror. Across human space, fear spread like wildfire. Entire colonies vanished overnight. Cargo ships disappeared without a trace. Military outposts were silently wiped out, not destroyed, but emptied, as if the people had simply walked away into the darkness. There were no alarms, no distress signals, just silence. And the most terrifying part, there were no bodies. The council meets. In the underground war room on Earth, tensions were high. President Eleanor Graves sat at the head of the table, her expression grim. Around her were Admiral Julian Kane, Dr. Elias Carter, Dr. Sarah Lynn, and top military strategists. On the holoscreens, reports flooded in. Missing ships, vanished colonies, survivors found too terrified to speak. "This is worse than an invasion," Admiral Kane muttered. "This is psychological warfare." Carter nodded. "They learned from us," he said. "We turned fear into a weapon. Now, they're doing the same." President Graves folded her hands. "So the question is, how do we fight an enemy we can't see?" A desperate plan. Dr. Lynn leaned forward. "The fear pulse worked before," she said. "Maybe we can use it again." Kane shook his head. "Against what? We don't even know where they are. We can't fire at empty space." Carter exhaled slowly. "Then we find them." Graves raised an eyebrow. "How?" Carter pulled up a hologram. "If we assume that Selvans are operating in small, hidden strike teams, then they must have a central command, a place coordinating all these attacks." Admiral Kane crossed his arms. "You think they have a base?" "Not a base," Carter corrected. "A hive mind." The room fell silent. "The hive mind theory," Carter continued, "that Selvans used to operate through strict military chains of command. But now, they're acting like something else. More like a network, moving in complete silence, coordinated perfectly." Lynn's eyes widened. "A hive mind," she whispered. Carter nodded. "We've seen similar behavior in other species. When they experience extreme trauma, they begin to act as a collective. Their individual minds become linked, operating as one." Kane clenched his jaw. "You're saying the fear pulse didn't just break them, it changed them." Carter nodded. "They aren't just soldiers anymore. There's something new. And that meant somewhere out there, there was a central consciousness controlling them. If they could find it, they could end this war for good." The mission begins. Within hours, the plan was set. A single ship, the UES Phantom, was sent into deep space. A small team of elite operatives, scientists, and AI specialists would track the Selvans' movements, searching for the source of their hive mind. The mission was simple: find the source, destroy it. The Ghost Fleet. Days later, the Phantom drifted silently through an uncharted nebula, tracking strange energy signals. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, the ship's captain, sat in a command chair, staring at the eerie glow of the nebula. "Anyone else have a bad feeling about this?" he muttered. Dr. Lynn, monitoring the scans, frowned. "We're picking up something," she said. "Faint transmissions, almost like whispers." Hale's stomach twisted. "Can you clear it up?" Lynn adjusted the filters. The static-filled signal shifted, and suddenly, A voice whispered through the comms. "You found us." Hale's blood ran cold. Before he could react, the ship's lights flickered. Then, alarms blared. Selvan ships inbound. They were waiting for us. The trap is sprung. In an instant, the Phantom was surrounded. From the darkness of the nebula, Selvan warships emerged, silent, sleek, designed for stealth. They didn't open fire. Instead, they disabled the Phantom's engines, trapping the humans inside. A message flashed on the main screen. "We are not your enemy." Captain Hale stared at it in disbelief. "What the hell does that mean?" Dr. Lin's voice was shaky. I don't think they're here to kill us." A second message appeared. "We need to talk." A new truth revealed. The crew hesitated. No Selvan had ever asked to talk before. Captain Hale took a deep breath. "Patch them through," he ordered. The screen flickered. Then, for the first time, they saw him. Lord Varish, leader of the surviving Selvans, stared back at them. But something was different. His eyes weren't filled with rage or even fear. They were filled with pain. "We do not seek war anymore," Varish said quietly. "We seek survival." The room fell silent. Dr. Lin leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Varish exhaled, his voice tired. "The fear pulse did more than defeat us. It shattered our minds. It made us something else. We are not Selvan anymore." Captain Hale frowned. "Then what are you?" Varish's gaze darkened. "We are the Forgotten. The enemy that watches." Varish's voice grew urgent. "You think you won the war, humans, but you don't understand. We were never the greatest threat in this galaxy. We were only the first line of defense." Carter's stomach twisted. "Against what?" Varish's expression hardened. "Something older than both of us. Something watching. Waiting." Hale leaned forward. "Waiting for what?" Varish's eyes burned with fear. "For the war to end. Because now, nothing is stopping them from coming." The screen flickered, and a new transmission came through. One that neither human nor Selvan had sent. A deep, inhuman voice whispered through the speakers. "We see you." The lights flickered out. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The unknown threat. The moment the deep, inhuman voice whispered through the speakers, everything changed. The lights on the UES Phantom flickered. Systems shut down. A cold, unnatural silence filled the ship. Captain Marcus Hale gripped the armrest of his chair, his heart pounding. What the hell was that? Dr. Sarah Lynn's hands trembled over her console. I don't know." Across the view screen, Lord Varish, leader of the Selvan survivors, sat frozen in fear. His dark eyes were wide, his claws twitching. "No," he whispered. "It's too soon. They shouldn't be here yet." Captain Hale turned to him. "Who? What are we dealing with?" Varish slowly looked up, his voice hollow. "The real rulers of this galaxy. A presence in the dark." The Phantom shuddered as a strange energy pulse rippled through the ship. Every screen glitched, showing static for a moment before displaying something impossible. Coordinates written in an unknown language. "They're sending us a message," Dr. Lin whispered. Carter leaned forward. "Coordinates to what?" Varish's voice was cold. "To them." Captain Hale clenched his jaw. "So we have a choice," he muttered. "Ignore this, or go and see what's waiting for us." Silence filled the room. Then President Graves' voice crackled over the comms. "Humanity doesn't turn away from the unknown," she said. "We find answers." Hale exhaled. "Then let's go." The journey into the abyss. The Phantom, escorted by a handful of elite warships, jumped to the coordinates. The moment they exited warp, the crew stared in disbelief. They had arrived at a dead system, a place where every planet was shattered. Every star dimmed, as if something had drained the very life from it. At the center of the system floated a single massive object. A structure. A station the size of a planet, built from an unknown black metal, pulsing with eerie, golden light. Dr. Lin's voice was barely a whisper. "What is that?" Varish stood beside her, his eyes filled with dread. "That is the last warning ever left by the first civilizations of this galaxy." Captain Hale narrowed his eyes. "A warning about what?" Varish exhaled slowly. "About the ones who come when war is over." The silent graveyard. The Phantom approached the massive structure carefully. Every scan came back empty. No life signs, no power readings beyond the strange golden pulses. It was ancient, older than the Selvins, older than any known species. Dr. Carter's fingers traced the translated words across the station's surface. "When the great empires fall, they awaken." The Phantom's crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Who awakens?" Hale muttered. Then, without warning, the structure responded. A deep hum filled the ship as a golden energy wave pulsed out, spreading across the system. Varish gasped, stepping back. "They know we are here." Before anyone could react, a new object appeared on the scanners, something massive, rising from the darkness of deep space, something that had been asleep for a long time, something waking up. The arrival of the Forgotten Ones. The scanners failed to detect it properly. The object was too massive, too unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. And then, the darkness shifted. A shape emerged. Not a ship, not a station, but something alive, something ancient. It was like a living shadow, shifting and twisting, its form never fully solid. It had no engines, no weapons, yet every human aboard the Phantom felt an instinctive terror clawing at their minds. Something was looking at them, not with eyes, but with an intelligence that existed beyond time itself. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but directly into their minds. "Your war is over. Now it is our turn." The crew collapsed, gripping their heads as a flood of incomprehensible thoughts invaded their minds. Memories that were not their own. Visions of civilizations long dead, entire species erased from history, leaving behind only empty worlds and silent stars. This thing had seen the rise and fall of empires before humanity even existed, and now it had set its sights on them. A choice that will define the future. The voice faded. The darkness shifted. The ancient entity did not attack. It simply waited. A test. A decision. Dr. Carter, breathing heavily, forced himself to his feet. It's watching us," he gasped. Varish's voice was hoarse. "It always watches." Hale steadied himself. "We need to leave. Now." But Carter shook his head. "No." His voice was firm. "We need to understand." Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the comms. "Carter, get out of there. We don't negotiate with nightmares." But Carter stared at the massive being in front of them, his mind racing. "Maybe we don't have a choice. Because if this thing was truly ancient, if it had destroyed entire civilizations, then running wouldn't save them. Nothing would, except learning what it wanted." And so, with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance, Carter did the only thing that made sense. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind. And the entity responded. In an instant, he saw everything. He saw what was coming. And he understood. The war between humanity and the Selvins was just a distraction. The real war was only beginning. A new era begins. Dr. Elias Carter's mind burned. The ancient entity had shown him everything. A vision of a galaxy reset, civilizations erased, stars extinguished, history rewritten over and over. Humanity's war with the Selvins. It was nothing. A distraction. A tiny conflict in the grand cycle that had played out countless times before. And now, it was happening again. The Ancient Ones had awakened, and humanity was next. The warning. The UES Phantom floated in the dead system, surrounded by eerie silence. Carter gasped as he broke free from the entity's grip, collapsing onto the floor. His head pounded, his body shaking from the weight of what he had just seen. Dr. Sarah Lynn was at his side in an instant. "Carter, what happened?" He looked up at her, eyes wide. "We have to go. Now." Captain Hale turned from the command console. "What did you see?" Carter's voice was hoarse. "They're coming." Hale's stomach twisted. "Who?" Carter exhaled sharply. "The ones who always come after the wars are over. The ones who wipe the board clean." He turned to Varish, the Selvan warlord. "You knew, didn't you?" Varish gave a slow, pained nod. "We always suspected. We just never lived long enough to be sure." Now there was no more doubt. This was real. And the galaxy had very little time left. The return to Earth. The Phantom made an emergency jump back to Earth. Every ship that had accompanied them returned as well. Some of humanity's most advanced warships, all carrying the single terrifying message: prepare for extinction. In the underground war room, President Eleanor Graves, Admiral Julian Kane, and the top military and scientific leaders sat in stunned silence as Carter and Varish explained what was coming. "There is no fighting this enemy," Varish admitted. "Your ships, your weapons, even your fear pulse, it will not matter." Admiral Kane slammed his fist on the table. "There has to be a way to stop them." Carter hesitated. "There might be, but we're going to have to do something no one has ever done before." Graves leaned forward. "And what's that?" Carter exhaled. "We unite. Every species, every empire, everyone who's still alive." The room fell into heavy silence. The Selvans, the humans, the scattered remnants of other fallen civilizations. They had all been enemies for so long. But now it was survival. Now they had to stand together. Because the real war wasn't against each other. It was against something far worse. The Galactic Alliance. For the first time in recorded history, an emergency summit was called. Representatives from every surviving species met on Earth. Some came in secret, too afraid to be seen aligning with their former enemies. Others came with hatred still burning in their hearts, but with no choice left but to listen. Humanity led the discussion. The Selvan warlords stood beside them. Dr. Carter and Varish presented the truth. The ancient beings were awake, and they would not stop until the galaxy was reset once more. "We have two choices," Carter said to the gathered leaders. "We can fight alone and be erased." He looked around the chamber, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Or we stand together and become the first civilization in history to break the cycle." Silence. Then, one by one, the leaders began to agree. Old grudges no longer mattered, because the only future they had left was the one they built together. The dawn of the last war. As the Galactic Alliance was formed, the first signs of the enemy's arrival appeared. Stars began to die, vanishing in total silence. Entire planets crumbled into dust without warning. The ancient ones weren't invading. They were erasing, just like they always had. But this time, they would face something new. A unified galaxy, a force that had never existed before. And for the first time in countless cycles, the ones who erased civilizations might finally find themselves facing resistance. A new era begins. The first fleets of the Galactic Alliance set out, preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of everything. On the bridge of the UES Titan, Earth's newest flagship, Captain Hale stood alongside Varish, both of them staring into the stars. "We were enemies once," Varish murmured. "Now we fight together." Hale nodded. "Maybe that's the only way we ever stood a chance." Below them, the war machine of a united galaxy moved into action. For the first time, the cycle was being challenged. For the first time, the erasers of history would have to fight for their own survival. And as the final battle for existence approached, one truth remained. This was no longer just a war for humanity. This was a war for the future of the galaxy itself.